Seattle rain at 2 in the morning doesn't sound like rain. It sounds like static cold, constant humming against the hospital window while I lay in an emergency room bed trying not to scream. The doctor had just told me I was bleeding internally and needed surgery within the hour. My twins were asleep at a neighbor's house, but she had work soon. I needed my parents, so I called them. And that's when I learned something that still chills me. Apparently, a yacht club gala was more important than their daughter's life. The doctor didn't sugarcoat it. He stood at the foot of the narrow emergency room bed, the fluorescent lights washing everything in a harsh, pale glow. My abdomen felt like someone had threaded a live wire through it and was twisting it tighter every second. "You have a ruptured cyst," he said calmly. "You're bleeding internally. We need to take you into surgery within the hour." Within the hour. The words echoed in my head, strangely clear despite the pain. My mind skipped past the fear, past the hospital smell and the steady beep of monitors, and landed on the only thing that mattered. My boys, Liam and Lucas, were asleep across town at our neighbor's place. She'd been kind enough to take them when the pain started earlier that night, but she had work in 4 hours. I couldn't ask her to keep them longer. I needed family. My hands were shaking slightly as I picked up my phone and dialed my mother. It rang once, twice, 3 times. She answered on the 4th ring. "What is it?" Her voice wasn't groggy with sleep. It was sharp, irritated. "Mom," I whispered, gripping the thin hospital sheet with my free hand. "I'm in the ER. The doctors say I need emergency surgery. Can you come get the boys?" There was a pause. Not the kind of pause where someone is shocked or worried. The kind where someone is annoyed. Then she sighed. "Sophia, really?" I stared at the ceiling tiles, trying to focus through the pain. "Yes, really. I'm bleeding internally. They're taking me into surgery soon. I just need someone to stay with Liam and Lucas." Another sigh, louder this time. "Well, that's very inconvenient," she said. "Inconvenient. We have the yacht club gala tomorrow," she continued. "The centennial event. We've had those VIP tickets for months." For a moment, I thought I'd misunderstood her. "Mom," I said slowly, "I'm about to have surgery, and we need our rest," she replied, her tone turning impatient. "These things go late. Your father is networking with the Commodore. It's important." The pain in my stomach pulsed harder, but something colder was spreading through my chest. "Is that a no?" I asked. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she snapped. "Just call a service or something. There are plenty of babysitting apps. We cannot show up to the gala exhausted." I swallowed. "Mom, I'm going into surgery." "Well, then handle it quickly," she said. "And Sophia, don't make this about you." The line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand, the screen slowly dimming. For a moment, I thought maybe she'd call back. Maybe the reality of what she'd just said would hit her. Instead, my phone buzzed with a text. From my sister Alexa. "Don't ruin this for them, Sophia. It's the social event of the season." That was it. "No, are you okay?" "No, what's happening?" Just a warning not to interfere with their plans. I lay there in the hospital bed, the rain hissing softly against the window, and something inside me went very still. My life, my children's safety, weighed against a yacht club gala, and apparently I'd just learned which one mattered more. For a long moment after the call ended, I just stared at the dark screen of my phone. The rain outside the window kept whispering against the glass, that soft static sound filling the room. Somewhere down the hallway, a cart rattled past. A monitor beeped steadily beside me. Everything felt strangely quiet. You'd think that would have been the moment I broke down. A normal daughter might have called back, begged, tried to explain that internal bleeding wasn't a scheduling conflict. But something inside me had already shifted. I set the phone down on the little plastic table beside the bed and looked up at the ceiling. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. My abdomen throbbed with sharp, pulsing pain, but my thoughts had become almost surgical. Clear, precise. Slowly, carefully, I reached for my purse. Every movement had to be deliberate because even the smallest twist sent a hot spike through my stomach. I pulled out my phone again and opened my banking app. It loaded the familiar blue screen appearing, and there it was. Scheduled transfer $3,000. First of the month, just like every month for the past 3 years. I stared at the number for a long time. $3,000, 36 months. Ever since Mark died, my parents had called it helping out. They said the marina condo fees were rising. Inflation was hard on retirees. The boat maintenance was getting expensive. Family helps family, they said. I had believed them. But lying there in that hospital bed, something finally clicked into place. Like a math problem that suddenly resolves itself when you see the missing piece. This wasn't help. This was rent. I'd been paying $3,000 a month for the privilege of being their daughter, paying a subscription fee for their approval, their calls, their invitations to Sunday dinner. And apparently emergency support wasn't included in the package. I actually let out a small breath that almost sounded like a laugh, because suddenly it all made sense. When I was solvent and useful, I was loved. When I was bleeding in a hospital bed, I was an inconvenience. My thumb hovered over the screen. For years, I had told myself this was loyalty, that this was what good daughters did. But loyalty isn't supposed to work like a credit card. If love was a transaction, then I was done doing business. My thumb pressed the screen. Cancel transfer. The button turned gray, just like that. Next, I opened the recurring payments tab. 3 taps. Delete, delete, delete. 3 years of quiet financial bleeding. Gone in under 30 seconds. Then I opened my contacts. Mom, block. Dad, block. Alexa, block. Each one took less than a second. By the time I finished, the room felt different. The pain in my abdomen was still there, sharp, demanding, impossible to ignore. But the heavy weight that had been sitting on my chest since Mark's funeral, the constant pressure of trying to keep everyone happy, that was gone. It was like someone had opened a window in a room I didn't realize had been suffocating me. A nurse walked in a few minutes later with a clipboard and a sympathetic smile. She probably saw a woman lying alone in the middle of the night, about to go into emergency surgery. What she didn't see was that for the first time in years, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt free. Recovery gives you a strange kind of silence. For 3 days, I lay in that hospital bed while my body slowly stitched itself back together. The pain came and went in dull waves. The nurses moved quietly in and out, and the rain kept sliding down the windows like Seattle was trying to wash the whole city clean. I didn't watch television. I didn't scroll through my phone. Mostly, I just lay there staring at the ceiling while the movie of my life started replaying behind my eyes. But this time something was different. It was like watching an old film with the sound turned off. For years, I'd listened to my parents' explanations, their excuses, their reassurances that everything they asked from me was normal. Family helps. Family. Good daughters step up. But now lying there in that quiet hospital room, I stopped listening to the words. I started watching the actions. And once you do that, the story looks very different. The first memory that surfaced was from about 5 years earlier. My father had shown up at my kitchen table one afternoon, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. His shoulders were hunched, his hands twisting together like he didn't know where to put them. Sophia. He'd said, his voice low and strained. I made a mistake. That sentence alone had been enough to make my stomach drop. Apparently, a bridge game at the marina had gotten out of control. What started as friendly betting had turned into something uglier, and suddenly he owed money. A lot of money. $17,000. If I don't pay it, he said quietly, I'll lose the boat. The boat. To anyone else, it was just fiberglass and an engine. But to my father, it was his identity. It was how he fit in with the yacht club crowd. The boat was his proof that he belonged there. Losing it would have been a social death sentence, so I didn't hesitate. Mark and I had been saving for a down payment on a house at the time. We'd spent years slowly building that account together. I drained it in one afternoon. $17,000 wired straight to the creditor. When I told my father it was done, he didn't hug me. He didn't thank me. He just nodded and said, You're a good girl, Sophia. You know how to take care of family. At the time, that had felt like praise. Now, remembering it from a hospital bed, it sounded more like an invoice being acknowledged. Then there was Alexa. My little sister had always wanted to be an actress. Not casually, not as a hobby. She believed she was meant for it. So when she moved to Los Angeles, the family rallied around her dream. My parents spoke about it like she was some rare talent the world simply hadn't discovered yet. She has a gift, my mother would say, and apparently gifts needed funding. I paid for the professional headshots. I paid for the acting classes. I paid for 2 years of living expenses while she waited for her big break. My parents praised her dedication. They praised her courage. And me? I was the quiet investor behind the curtain. Looking back, I realized something else too. Mark had always seen it. My husband had been the only person in my life who watched those moments unfold and didn't pretend they were normal. I could still picture him sitting beside me at the kitchen table, after one of those checks had been written, gently holding my hand. His thumb would rub across my knuckles while he looked at me with that calm, steady concern. They're eating you alive, Soph, he told me once. I remember laughing it off. No, they're not, I said. They're family. He shook his head slowly. They're eating you piece by piece, he said quietly. And they're not even hungry. They're just gluttonous. At the time, I defended them. I told him they needed me. But after Mark died, the illusion started cracking. The memory of his funeral came back to me in painful detail as I lay there in that hospital bed. The air had been thick and humid that day, the kind of sticky summer heat that clings to your skin. I remember standing near the grave, barely holding myself together, when my mother leaned over and whispered something in my ear. This humidity is ruining my hair, she complained softly. Not, are you okay? Not, I'm sorry you lost him. Just frustration about the weather. Later that same afternoon, before the dirt had even fully settled over Mark's coffin, my father pulled me aside. He lowered his voice like he was asking a practical question. So, the life insurance policy, he said. Do you know how much the payout will be? At the time, I was too numb to process it, too exhausted to see what was right in front of me. But now watching those memories again from the quiet distance of a hospital bed, the pattern was undeniable. They hadn't seen a grieving widow. They'd seen an unguarded bank account. And that realization changed everything. Cutting them off suddenly didn't feel cruel. It didn't feel vindictive. It felt like correcting an accounting error that had been bleeding for years. Because the truth was simple. I had given them everything. Money, time, loyalty. And in return, all they had given me were new ways to pay. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was just closing a ledger that had been in the red for far too long. I went home 4 days after the surgery. The apartment felt quiet when I walked in, but not in a sad way. Just still. The kind of quiet you get after a storm finally moves on. Liam and Lucas ran to hug me the second I stepped through the door, their small arms squeezing carefully around my waist once they remembered the bandages. Seeing them safe made the ache in my body feel manageable. Before leaving the hospital, I'd made one practical decision. Instead of sending that $3,000 to my parents, I used it to hire help. Her name was Elena. She was calm, efficient, and kind in that steady way that makes children feel safe immediately. She helped with the twins while I rested on the couch with pillows propped around my stomach. And the most surprising part, she never complained. She never hinted that I owed her anything beyond the job. She simply did what she said she would do. For the first time in years, I paid for help and actually received it. My phone stayed silent during those first 3 days at home. Completely silent. I kept my parents and Alexa blocked, preserving that fragile peace like it was a glass sculpture that might shatter if I touched it too hard. But on the 4th day, curiosity got the better of me. I was sitting at the kitchen table while the boys colored dinosaurs on construction paper. Elena was folding laundry nearby. My phone sat beside my coffee mug. I stared at it for a while. Then, almost without thinking, I opened my contacts. One by one, I temporarily removed the blocks. The reaction was instant. My phone began vibrating so hard it nearly rattled off the table. Notifications exploded across the screen. Missed calls, voicemails, text messages, 57 missed calls, 82 messages. The numbers alone made my stomach tighten. For a brief moment, a small part of me wondered if they had finally realized something was wrong. Maybe they'd tried to check on me after the surgery. Maybe they were worried. I started scrolling, and within seconds that small hope vanished. The messages weren't concerned. They were furious. Declined. Embarrassing. Fix this. What the hell did you do? I kept scanning my eyes, searching for a single word like hospital, surgery. Are you okay? There was nothing. Instead, I found a voice message from my mother. I pressed play. Her voice burst through the speaker, high and furious, echoing with the hollow acoustics of what sounded like a marble bathroom. Sophia, you ungrateful girl, do you have any idea what you've done? I sat back slowly in my chair. The card was declined. She continued. Declined at the Gala bar. In front of the Commodore. Your father had to ask a friend to cover our tab. I closed my eyes briefly. We have never been so humiliated, she snapped. You embarrassed us on purpose. Fix this immediately. Transfer the money now or don't bother coming to Sunday dinner. The message ended. I replayed one sentence in my head. The card was declined. Not, are you alive? Not, did the surgery go okay? Just declined. Then I opened the text from my father. You think you're clever? That money is ours. We earned it raising you. You're punishing us for having a life. And finally, Alexa. Mom is crying in her room. Dad is throwing things. I hope you're happy. You ruined the gala. I sat there staring at the screen for a long moment. They weren't worried about me. They weren't relieved I survived surgery. They were angry that the ATM had stopped working. And in that moment, any lingering doubt I might have had simply disappeared. There was no misunderstanding, no miscommunication. They understood exactly what had happened. They just didn't care. So I did the only thing that made sense. I screenshotted every message, every voicemail, every timestamp. And when I finished documenting it all, I quietly blocked them again. After I blocked them again, the silence returned. But this time it didn't feel peaceful. It felt temporary. I sat at the kitchen table that evening while Liam and Lucas built a crooked block tower on the floor. My phone rested beside me, Screen dark, but my mind kept replaying those messages. Declined. Fix this. That money is ours. They weren't worried. They weren't confused. They were angry. And people like my parents, people like Richard and Cynthia didn't respond well to losing control. They didn't apologize. They didn't reflect. They escalated. The more I thought about it, the more a cold, uncomfortable certainty settled into my chest. Cutting them off financially wasn't the end of the conflict. It was the beginning of it. Because if the money was gone forever, there was only one thing left in my life they could try to leverage. My children. That realization sat with me for the rest of the night. The next morning, I made a call I had been putting off, but suddenly knew I couldn't avoid. Grace picked up on the second ring. Grace and I had known each other since college, but over the years, our friendship had evolved into something else too. She worked as a hospital social worker now, someone who spent her days navigating the messy, complicated reality of broken families and custody disputes. In other words, exactly the kind of situation I was afraid I might be heading into. Sophia, she said when she heard my voice. I heard about the surgery. Are you okay? I'm recovering, I said, but I need your help. Not as a friend, as a professional. That got her attention. I walked her through everything. The emergency room, my parents refusing to come because of the yacht club gala, the blocked calls, the canceled payments, the avalanche of angry messages about their declined credit card. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Not disbelief, recognition. Finally, Grace exhaled slowly. Okay, she said. The calmness in her voice was almost unsettling. This isn't just a family argument, Sophia. What you're describing is financial abuse. The words hung in the air. I'd never used that phrase before. I'd always framed it differently in my mind. Helping, supporting, being the responsible one. But hearing it called what it actually was shifted something. They depended on you financially, Grace continued. And now that you've cut that off, they're going to panic. I know, I said quietly. And when people panic, she said they look for leverage. My grip tightened on the phone. You think they'll try something with the twins? I think it's very possible, Grace said. They could claim you're unstable. They might argue the surgery affected your judgment. They could even say you're isolating the children from family. The idea made my stomach twist. But that's ridiculous, I said. It doesn't have to be true, Grace replied. It just has to be convincing enough to start a legal headache. That was the moment the situation stopped feeling emotional and started feeling strategic. For the next week, Grace practically moved into my dining room. Stacks of documents began to take over the table. Bank statements, receipts, old emails, screenshots of texts and voicemails. We built a timeline of everything that had happened, from the night in the emergency room to the furious messages about the declined card. Then we started digging deeper. Grace asked me to pull every financial record I had involving my parents. At first, I thought it would be a handful of transfers. But when we started adding it all up, the numbers became impossible to ignore. The $17,000 for my father's gambling debt, years of monthly payments for their marina condo, boat repairs, Alexa's acting classes, headshots, living expenses. Line after line filled the spreadsheet. By the time we reached the bottom, Grace leaned back in her chair and let out a low whistle. Sophia, she said quietly, turning the laptop toward me. The total sat there in bold numbers. Over $100,000. Money that should have gone into savings, into the twins' future, into the life Mark and I had planned. Seeing it laid out like that didn't make me cry. It hardened something inside me. Because suddenly the situation looked very different. I wasn't just a daughter who had been taken advantage of. I was an investor who had been systematically drained. Grace helped me secure everything. We changed passwords on every account I owned, separated finances completely, locked down anything that might allow my parents to claim access or influence. Then we drafted legal protections, emergency custody documents. If anything ever happened to me, the twins would go to Grace, not my parents. Explicitly, legally. By the end of the week, my dining table looked less like a home office and more like a war room. Every document carefully organized, every message preserved, every vulnerability sealed, and slowly, the fear that had been creeping around the edges of my thoughts began to fade. Not because the threat was gone, but because I was ready for it. If my parents wanted a fight, they were going to find something very different from the daughter they used to rely on. They had spent years using my love as leverage. Now I had something stronger, proof it was raining again. The afternoon, everything changed. Seattle has a way of doing that, turning the sky into one long gray curtain. The windows of my dining room were streaked with water while Grace and I sat surrounded by stacks of paperwork. Insurance documents, bank statements, old tax returns. Our little war room, as Grace jokingly called it. The twins were in the living room with Elena laughing over some cartoon, while Grace flipped carefully through another folder. I was halfway through updating the spreadsheet of old transfers when I heard her say my name. Sophia. Her voice was quiet. Too quiet. I looked up from my laptop. What is it? Grace was staring down at a sheet of paper, her brow furrowed. I thought you said Mark's life insurance policy lapsed. My throat tightened immediately. It did, I said. The month before the accident, we missed a payment. Money was tight because of the loan I gave my dad for the boat. The policy canceled. There was no payout. That was the story I had carried for 3 years. One missed payment. One unlucky timing. Grace slowly slid a document across the table toward me. This says otherwise. I leaned forward and picked up the paper. It was a payment record. A premium statement. The policy number was Mark's. The same one I remembered signing years earlier when we first bought the coverage. But the dates kept going. Month after month, year after year. 3 years of payments. That's not possible, I said. My eyes moved lower on the page, searching for the account information. And then I saw it. The payment source, a joint account. Richard and Cynthia, my parents. For a moment, my brain simply refused to process it. I don't understand, I said slowly. Why would they pay Mark's life insurance premiums? Grace didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached for another document in the folder. Look at this one, she said. She placed it in front of me and tapped a line near the bottom. Beneficiary change request. The form was dated 2 weeks after Mark's funeral. 2 weeks. My hands started to feel numb as I scanned the page. There it was, in my mother's unmistakable looping handwriting. Primary beneficiary Richard and Cynthia, my parents. The room seemed to tilt slightly around me. They kept the policy active, I whispered. Grace nodded grimly. They've been paying the premiums for 3 years, she said, quietly. And they made sure the payout goes to them. My stomach turned. But that policy only pays if... I stopped. I didn't finish the sentence. Grace didn't need me to. It only pays if you die, she said quietly. The words hung in the air like something poisonous. My mind started connecting dots faster than I could stop it. For 3 years, they'd been telling me they were struggling financially, that condo fees were rising, that inflation was crushing retirees. They needed my $3,000 every month. And yet somehow, they had money to keep paying premiums on a policy that only paid out if I wasn't alive. My chair scraped the floor as I pushed back suddenly. A sick wave rolled through my stomach. No, I whispered. But the timeline was already assembling itself in my head. 3 years of secret payments, a beneficiary change right after Mark's funeral, and then the night in the emergency room. The the phone call. My voice telling my mother I was bleeding internally, telling her I needed surgery. And her response, "We need our rest for the gala." The realization hit so hard it felt physical. If something had gone wrong during that surgery, if the bleeding hadn't stopped, if I hadn't woken up, they wouldn't just be free of their financial burden, they'd be rich. I stumbled toward the bathroom before the thought fully finished forming. My hands gripped the sink while I bent over it, dry heaving as my body tried to reject the horror of it. All those years, all those demands, all the times they called me selfish for questioning their requests. They weren't just draining me. They were maintaining an investment, waiting. I splashed cold water on my face and slowly looked up at my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back looked pale, shaken, but something else had changed too. The last tiny voice in my head, the one that had whispered, maybe they just didn't know how to love properly, was gone. Completely gone. They weren't confused parents. They weren't careless. They had calculated. They had placed a bet, and the bet was on my death. When I walked back into the dining room, Grace was watching me carefully. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. I sat down at the table and picked up the documents again. The payment records, the beneficiary form, the proof. "No," I said. My voice sounded strangely calm, but I know exactly what I have to do. I tapped the stack of papers with my finger. "They wanted a payout," I said quietly. "Well, they're about to get one, just not the kind they expected." It took 3 weeks for the collapse to begin. 3 weeks without my monthly transfers. 3 weeks without the quiet financial life support I'd been providing for years. At first, I heard nothing. The silence stayed intact just the way I had designed it. No calls, no messages. But news travels strangely through families, even when you've cut most of the lines of communication. My aunt called one afternoon. She was one of the few relatives I hadn't blocked, not because we were close, but because she mostly stayed out of the drama. Her voice sounded uneasy. "Sophia, I don't know what's going on between you and your parents," she said carefully, "but things are bad." "How bad?" I asked. There was a pause. "The bank took the condo." I closed my eyes briefly. "And the boat," she added quietly. "Repo." That part didn't surprise me. For years, my parents had built their entire lifestyle around appearances. Marina memberships, yacht club, dinners, expensive outfits for events that existed purely to show everyone else that you belong there. But the truth was simple, that life had been funded by my quiet monthly payments. Once the money stopped, the illusion collapsed. According to my aunt, the eviction notice came fast, faster than they expected. Apparently, the condo fees hadn't been paid for months before my transfer cancellations pushed everything over the edge. Without the boat, my father lost his standing at the marina. Without the condo, they lost the address that made them look important. Within days, they weren't yacht club regulars anymore. They were just two aging people scrambling to figure out where they were going to sleep. I didn't feel triumphant when I heard the news. Mostly I felt inevitable, because none of this had happened overnight. This was simply the bill coming due. It was raining again the day they showed up. Seattle rain, steady gray, unrelenting. I was in the kitchen, spooning mashed bananas into Lucas's bowl, while Liam stacked toy dinosaurs on the table. Elena had just stepped outside to bring in the laundry when I heard the sound of tires crunching against the gravel driveway. I glanced out the window. A small rental car pulled to a stop. Not the sleek luxury SUV my parents used to lease. This one looked cheap, compact, temporary. Two figures stepped out into the rain. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize them. My mother's hair, usually styled into a perfect glossy wave, was already frizzing in the damp air. Her coat looked older, cheaper than the tailored pieces she used to wear to yacht club events. My father looked smaller. His shoulders were slumped forward like someone had quietly removed the spine that used to hold him upright. They walked up the path slowly. Desperate people. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked to the front door. Before they could knock, I opened it. The rain blew sideways across the porch, soaking the wooden boards. I didn't invite them inside. I simply stood in the doorway, blocking it. "Sophia," my mother said immediately, her voice cracking. "Please, it's raining." I can see that I replied calmly. My father cleared his throat. "We're losing everything," he said. His voice sounded rough, stripped of the arrogance that used to coat every word. "The bank took the condo. The boat's gone. We have nowhere to go." The rain ran down his face, mixing with something that might have been tears. "We're family, Sophia," he said. "You can't let us live in a motel." The word family landed in the space between us. Heavy, rotten. "Family," I repeated slowly. My mind flashed back to the emergency room. The white lights. The doctor saying I needed surgery within the hour. My mother sighing into the phone. "We need our rest for the gala." Like when I was bleeding in the ER, I said quietly. Both of them froze. My father's face drained of color. I don't know what you mean," he stammered. I turned slightly and reached for the folder sitting on the small entry table behind me. Grace had prepared it carefully, every document inside. I stepped forward and tossed the folder onto the wet porch. It landed with a heavy slap. The pages fanned out in the rain. Insurance records, payment statements, the beneficiary change form. "Dad," I said, my voice steady, "the premiums, the policy, the beneficiary change." My mother let out a strangled sound. "You didn't want a daughter," I continued calmly. "You wanted a payout." The rain soaked the papers as they stared down at them. "Well," I said quietly, "here it is." I crossed my arms. "That folder contains proof of insurance fraud," I said. "I sent copies to an investigator this morning." "Sophia, no," my mother cried, reaching toward me. "We were just securing our future." "You bet against mine," I replied. And then something unexpected happened. I waited for anger to rise, for rage, for the kind of burning satisfaction people imagine when justice finally arrives. But none of that came. Instead, I felt something else, a deep physical release, like a heavy rusted chain that had been wrapped around my chest for 33 years, had finally snapped under its own weight. The guilt, the obligation, the endless need for their approval, it all fell away in one quiet moment. When I looked at them, standing there in the rain, I didn't feel hatred. I didn't feel triumph. I felt nothing, just two strangers shivering on my porch. "You should go," I said calmly, "before the police arrive to take your statements." My father's voice cracked first. "Sophia, please," he said, stepping forward as the rain soaked through his jacket. "We're your parents." For years that sentence had carried weight. It had been the final argument, the thing that ended every disagreement. "We're your parents." But standing there on the porch, watching them shiver in the cold gray rain, the words sounded strangely empty, like a title that had lost its meaning. My mother reached toward me, her hand trembling. "We made mistakes," she said quickly, desperation creeping into her voice. "Everyone makes mistakes. You can't throw us away like this." "Throw them away?" The phrase hung in the air between us. For a moment, I studied their faces, really studied them. The lines around my father's eyes, the smudged mascara running down my mother's cheeks, the panic that had replaced the polished confidence they used to wear like armor at the yacht club. And something strange happened inside me. I waited for anger to return, for that burning righteous fury people talk about when they imagine moments like this. But it never came. Instead, what I felt was distance. Like I was looking at two strangers who happened to know my name. "You're right about one thing," I said quietly. They both leaned forward slightly, hope flickering across their faces. "You are my parents," I continued. "At least biologically." My father flinched. "But parents are supposed to show up," I said. "They're supposed to care if their daughter survives surgery." Neither of them spoke. The rain filled the silence, drumming softly against the porch roof. "I spent 33 years trying to earn your approval," I went on. "Trying to prove I was a good daughter. Sending money, fixing problems, cleaning up messes." My voice didn't shake. It didn't even rise. "And the night I needed you most, I said you chose a Gala." My mother's shoulders sagged. "Sophia, you made your choice," I finished gently. That was when my father started crying. Not the controlled tears he used at funerals or public events. Real ones. They mixed with the rain running down his face as he looked at me. "We have nowhere else to go," he whispered. For a second, an old reflex stirred in my chest, the instinct to fix things, to step in and solve the crisis like I always had. But the feeling faded almost as quickly as it appeared, because the truth had finally settled into place. These weren't my parents anymore, not in any way that mattered. They were just people I used to know. "You should go," I said softly. "The police will be here soon to talk about the insurance investigation." My mother gasped. My father stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "Sophia, please." I didn't answer. Instead, I stepped back into the house. The warmth from inside rushed around me, cutting through the damp chill that had drifted in from the porch. Then I closed the door. For a brief second, I could still hear them outside the rain, their muffled voices, the soft thud of papers shifting on the wet porch. And then I turned the deadbolt. Click. The sound was small, but in that moment, it felt louder than anything I had ever heard. Because it wasn't just a lock sliding into place. It was the sound of something breaking loose inside me. Like a rusted anchor chain finally snapping after years of tension. The guilt, the obligation, the endless need for their approval. All of it fell away in that single quiet moment. I stood there in the hallway for a few seconds, listening to the rain fade behind the door. And for the first time in my life, the silence that followed didn't feel lonely. It felt clean. Outside, the storm kept falling over Seattle. But inside, something in my life had finally ended. And strangely enough, that ending felt like the beginning of something better. 6 months later, the rain in Seattle finally stopped. Not completely, of course. This is still Seattle, but the endless gray stretch that had hung over everything for weeks finally broke. The sun came out one afternoon, weak and pale but real. The kind of sunlight that makes the whole world look like it's waking up slowly. I was sitting in the backyard of our new rental house when it happened. It wasn't anything fancy. Just a small place with a big, slightly overgrown garden that needed more work than I had time for. But it had space and quiet and a patch of dirt where 2 small boys could dig without anyone complaining. Liam and Lucas were doing exactly that. Both of them were on their knees in the garden bed, hands completely coated in soil, arguing about whether the hole they were digging was going to be a dinosaur cave or a treasure tunnel. Their laughter drifted across the yard in bright bursts that made the whole place feel alive. Kids move on faster than adults. They stopped asking about their grandparents months ago. Children, I've learned, don't measure love by titles. They measure it by presence. By who shows up. Grace showed up. Elena showed up. And most importantly, I showed up. That was enough. I had an envelope in my hands. Plain white, official. It had arrived earlier that morning. Inside was a letter from the insurance company's fraud investigation department. After months of reviewing documents, interviewing people, and tracing the payment history, they had reached their conclusion. My parents were facing charges: insurance fraud, financial misrepresentation, possibly more, once the district attorney finished reviewing the case. The letter was full of formal language and legal phrases, the kind that makes everything sound distant and procedural. It explained that the investigation was ongoing, that additional hearings might follow, that the process could take years to fully resolve. Reading it, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel revenge. Mostly I felt finished. I stood up from the patio chair and walked across the yard to the small fire pit I had built a few weeks earlier. It was nothing special, just a circle of stones with a metal basin in the middle. I struck a match. The tiny flame flickered to life in the breeze. For a moment, I held the corner of the letter above it. Then the paper caught. The fire spread slowly across the page, curling the edges inward. The official letterhead blackened, first, then crumbled into delicate gray ash. I watched the whole thing burn, not as a celebration, more like a quiet funeral. People like to say that cutting off family is the worst thing you can do. They talk about blood being thicker than water, about forgiveness and obligation. But they leave out an important part. A garden can't grow if you refuse to prune it. Sometimes there are branches that look like they belong, old, familiar part of the original tree. But they're dead, rotting, blocking the sunlight from reaching the parts that are still alive. Cutting them away hurts. It feels wrong at first, like you're damaging something that should be protected. But those dead branches aren't harmless. If you leave them there long enough, the rot spreads. Eventually, the whole tree dies. I pruned my garden. I cut deep enough that it hurt. But as I stood there watching Liam and Lucas laugh in the sunlight dirt on their hands and hope in their voices, I understood something clearly. My tree might have scars, but for the first time in 33 years, it was finally growing toward the light. Sometimes the hardest truth is this: protecting your peace may mean stepping away from people who share your blood, but not your care. Like tending a garden, life asks us to prune what's dead so the living parts can breathe and grow. It isn't cruelty, it's survival. If this story reminded you that choosing peace is okay, I'm glad you are here to hear it. And if it meant something to you, sharing it helps. That reminder reached someone else who might need it.